Okay, I want to thank everybody for phoning in. This is webinar will focus on debunking BIM myths. So hope you enjoy it. Just a reminder to everybody that this session is registered for the AIA through the AIA ConEd as a course provider or through IBI group. It'll qualify for one general learning unit. As with all previous offerings through IBIU, if you're in a room, please make sure you sign in on a sign-in sheet and you actually submit that to IBIU@ibigroup.com. If you don't, there won't be any record of your attendance. And again, include your AIA numbers as well as any other local registration into the question pane to qualify for the credit. This is copywritten through IBI Group 2017. So the description, very simple. We're going to identify some common BIM myths or myths associated with building information modeling and debunk them one by one. And these will be myths that either I have heard through the last couple of years or things industry-wide that keep getting repeated. So common myths within the AECO industry, address them, identify instances that you can promote the continued misuse of BIM. We want to make sure we try to avoid those. And then hopefully to build a bit of a comfort level to plan, execute, and account for BIM on our projects. So prior to jumping into the myths, I just wanted to reiterate through this audience that BIM is a part of the corporate vision of IBI Group. So IBI is currently pivoting itself as being a technology-driven design firm, and this is what's being expressed outwardly through our board to our shareholders, being publicized, and we're developing internal strategic initiatives in order to work to achieve this vision. BIM has been and will play a huge part in achieving this. In essence, it's vital to our survival that we actually embrace and move forward in the world of BIM. The progress from CAD to BIM is just as pivotal as it was from paper to CAD. And I'll say for the last decade or so, I've always been talking, or I've been talking about and hearing about the verbiage of this being a paradigm shift, but now we're a decade plus into this. We need to progress into the application of BIM on our projects as opposed to the application of CAD. And notice how I said that, and that'll be two of the myths that we're going to talk about as we go forward, the application of these processes. Our goal is to achieve 100% BIM compliance by year end, and as we talk through that, the initial, hopefully it's not an initial reaction of, oh my God, how can we do that? But it's understanding how to apply BIM at various points throughout the project scope to be purpose fit for specific instances of projects. Not everything possible in the BIM world applied to every single possible project scattered across IBI. It's not like that. So it is a corporate mandate, not an option, so we're driving to make this happen. On the flip side, many clients are asking us for BIM in various forms, either through RFPs or through P3 arrangements where the ultimate client may not have something to say, but the contractors or the entities who we're contracted to are driving some form of BIM requirement on a project. And new business models that we're looking at, empowered by those within our intelligence sector as well, are dependent on data. So if you think from the perspective of no matter what you're doing, buildings, infrastructure, intelligence, we design data in some form or another, and from that data, we generate our instruments of delivery, the most common being our paper drawings. Now, if you think of that from that perspective, say we're not making drawings, we're making data, hopefully that'll help to resonate the importance of BIM and help to understand why we have clients in the world that are actually driving some form of BIM as either a process or a deliverable, and government agencies that are working to consolidate nationally or continentally how BIM is being applied to achieve that synergy. So with that, we are going to jump into our first myth, and this is by far the most common myth that I hear all the time, and that is BIM is equal to Revit. So all of these, I have 14 myths, and it'll be myth and fact. And the fact is quite simple, BIM does not equal Revit, period. BIM never has equaled Revit, and it never will equal Revit. And that's a very, very critical thing that I want if that's the only takeaway, let that be the takeaway. BIM does not equal Revit. And some of the things, if you listen around your offices or the industry, you'll hear some of these. Did you install BIM? You don't even know what that means, other than it's, well, did you install Revit? Well, then ask that. One of my other favorites, and I've worked in the UK many moons ago, the UK mandated Revit. And that is the farthest from the truth. If you're interested in the UK BIM mandate, it's an amazing collection of documents under British Standard 1192. Give it a good read. I don't even know if it mentions Revit in the documentation, but I could be wrong. But the mandate is the application of the BIM process. Learning Revit means learning BIM. And I'm sure hopefully we've all heard that in some form where we say, yep, we do BIM because Revit's on the computer. Or I took a Revit training course, therefore I know BIM. Can't do BIM because no one has Revit installed. BIM doesn't apply because we're not using Revit. And I've heard that fifth bullet quite a bit, especially for non-architectural type of projects, which we'll touch on in a bit. The second last one was interesting because I've seen some RFPs that have said, do BIM in some form or another, right? And then the response was, well, we don't know how to. It's a civil project. It's a rail project. It's a transit project. It's got a whole bunch of components that, well, we wouldn't use Revit for. Therefore, the RFP doesn't make any sense because it's that immediate association to BIM equaling Revit. And then the last one, my staff says Revit is too hard, therefore we cannot do BIM. Right? And that word conglomeration at the bottom there, I put that in there because if you look at all of the various types of words that are associated to BIM, a lot of it is about business decisions, information, developing modeling, approaches, working with others, collaboration, synergy, data fusion, continuity, et cetera, et cetera. This is what BIM is about, and we'll expand on that a little more, but to debunk the myth. And I think we all need to just be very confident in our approach to say it's not Revit. Therefore, when we're in dialogue, are we talking about BIM or are we talking about Revit? Because there are dialogues to be had about Revit itself. Let's make sure we're saying the right thing when we're having those dialogues, especially when going outside into the industry or to our clients. Myth number 2, BIM is just for architects. So it's not just for architects, but for all disciplines throughout the project lifecycle. And what we've seen is that probably around the 2003-04 range, the term BIM was coined and picked up quickly by the architects. So the AIA sent out its first BIM documents. Architectural firms were the first to kind of apply the process, and Autodesk, with their Revit application, jumped on the BIM term. But if you look at, I thought, of all the images I wanted to find, I thought that image of a model kind of encapsulates every single possible discipline that can be infused together and forced to collaborate. And that's in a building space, but that's everybody. So civil engineers automatically would assume, well, BIM doesn't apply because BIM is about architects. And you can imagine the effect that would have if you're planning a project or there's expectations for the delivery of information models pertinent to those other disciplines. Proposals mention BIM, and PMs assume it's just 3D for architects. And I've seen that on some mass projects throughout the course of my career where, even building engineering would say, well, no, the BIM deliverable just applies to the architects. And, then you get into linear infrastructure, whether it's water treatment, roadway, bridges, et cetera. It's the complete ignoring of the fact that there is a BIM process to be applied, or there's a need for some type of an intelligent turnover because of that automatic association of it doesn't apply to my discipline. That bullet there, it's automatically assumed to be something that applies during design only, and thus only by design teams. And therefore, under this myth, only by the architect. Then that leads to one of the latter myths. But If anything BIM is only design, and then anything design is only architect because it's only Revit and it's only architects, all of a sudden the architect has the scope of the entire life cycle of the project infused and put together into one individual, or one discipline. BIM is in fact the synergy of information throughout the life cycle of the project. Now, if I step back for a moment, BIM could be just about a project where it's single discipline or just a small collection of disciplines, maybe focusing just on design, detailed design, maybe documentation. So it doesn't necessarily have to be every single phase throughout design, build, and operate. But even if it's just a building, BIM is never just one discipline because no buildings are just one discipline. So that's the main message of this myth, is that BIM is not just for the architects, but for the collection of all of the associated disciplines that would have an impact one way or another to the content or the items that are being designed and fit together. BIM is different from SIM, BRIM, etc., etc. BIM covers all information modeling. And I've combated this for a decade plus. So I described there, the industry has haphazardly created acronyms when dialoguing about BIM. And that's only a small collection. But bridge, transportation, assets, facilities, civil, PIM being piping or plant. I've also heard it being process or project. I've heard structural information model, mechanical information model, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it all stems out of the previous couple of myths where, well, if BIM is just for architects, we need our own acronym that talks about our discipline. At the end of the day, it's the verb of building information models, and that's what it is. Information models cover multiple assets that come together as a whole, whether you're designing buildings, linear infrastructure, so healthcare, hospitality, education, houses, transit stations. It's a bunch of stuff that comes together virtually. There's a bunch of disciplines that work together. So a lot of the confusion has occurred, and I've seen this again going to RFPs. The RFP says BIM doesn't apply to us because BIM is just for architects. So debunk that myth, please. It's the action of information modeling. On that note, we lead to this one here. BIM equals building information modeling and thus just focuses on buildings. Again, it's the action of information modeling. So it's creating information-rich models for any asset that we may design. And I'm using the term asset, use asset, component, thing, anything you see when you look around the space you're sitting in today, anything that you're designing in any of our projects. There's an action of creating information models that come together. Now, I pulled some examples over here. When I say BIM is not just for buildings, it's not just. So it could be for buildings. And I'm not sure if you're seeing my mouse move, but I've got two building examples there. Great. But it's everything else you see here as well. And I need to stress that because it is your conduits, your cable trays, your mechanical, it's your civil surfaces. Whether you're in roadways, roundabouts, rail corridors, etc., subsurface and at surface. It could be your linear-based assets scattered horizontally throughout an alignment. It could be plant assemblies. And then with the plant assemblies, I included at the top right, intelligent schematics. So in the world of heavy industrial planting, not only heavy industrial plants, not only do you have your actual 3D virtual model, but you have associated intelligent schematics that are tied to the model. And the reason for that is there's a lot of stuff in the plant models. There's other stuff that you won't ever model, like little level indicators and pressure indicators and a whole bunch of tiny little things that need to be accounted for as an asset because they cost thousands upon thousands of dollars. All of this, and then in the middle here, we've got the point cloud. So existing conditions modeling, whether it's scanning for points and upgrading those into one of the other applications, or whether it's condition modeling throughout the life cycle of a project, so to compare what's being built against what was actually modeled. All of this stuff is information models. So it's the verb, the act of creating all of these various types of information models and the process of pulling them all together for coordination and for delivering whatever it is we need to deliver as an output at whatever stage of a project, which could include drawings, but a whole bunch of other stuff too. CAD is equal to AutoCAD. I've got to give Autodesk a lot of credit here because their marketing engine was powerful when they did this. So this was early 80s. They made the application AutoCAD as a CAD application, and they've ingrained into the industry CAD is equal to AutoCAD. It's not true. CAD is computer-aided design. So what we've heard, and that quote there, we don't want to do BIM because we use CAD. Meaning we don't want to, if you debunk the myth, we don't want to do, we use AutoCAD, so we don't want to do Revit. So that's myth 1 and myth 5 combined together. A 2D CAD deliverable means we have to deliver in AutoCAD. It's not true. We've got many projects where the 2D CAD deliverable is something else. So I mentioned Autodesk's cleverness. They put CAD into the name, branding themselves the way Kleenex branded to tissue and Xerox branded to photocopying, iPhone to smartphones, you name it, right? Computer-aided design has been around for about 40 years. And I don't know if that's wholly accurate. It might even be understating it. It may not have been industry standard 40 years ago, but it's definitely been around. And if you look at the bottom left there, it's always been that process of there's this applied computer-aided design process that helps us to conceive, design, develop, and either validate when it's being built or send to manufacturer. That's that CAM term. So from CAD to CAM, computer-aided design to computer-aided manufacturing, there's been a lot of processes that were built in and workflows that allowed us to build in tools like AutoCAD and deliver to manufacturing plants. Very similar, but now enhanced. This is our shift. We've gone from the CAD process to now the BIM process. And that's something we have to understand as a deliverable. Similar, sorry, as a outcome. Similar, that life cycle nature. We were always thinking about the life cycle nature of information. We just have now a greater means to further enhance the information and do more with it throughout those various stages of design, build, and operate. The last bullet there, BIM solutions include 2D CAD. So be aware of that because we still have to deliver paper. And one day we won't, maybe. But at the end of the day, all of the stuff we model and all of the tools that we use and all of our means to create our information, one of our mechanisms of delivery is that 2D paper. And oftentimes our clients, even those that are well versed in BIM, so they may ask you for various model deliverables, we still need to probably give them CAD files. That goes right back to whatever their requirements are. It may be AutoCAD, it may be something else. And that's what I'm saying there. Doesn't mean all BIM solutions include AutoCAD. They include some form of CAD. Meaning, when I'm modeling something, and let's say I'm modeling a wall, the 2D representation of the wall will be very equivalent to how it was represented when I was working outside of a BIM authoring tool. So where I'm cutting the wall, it's darker than the stuff I'm seeing in the distance. That's just fundamental CAD, which was built upon fundamental paper drafting on the board. So those things are still built in, but that tie and connection to CAD and AutoCAD really has skewed how we go about building our approaches, building our deliverables, or just understanding the needs of our clients because they may state CAD and by default we jump to AutoCAD. In the same way they may state BIM and by default we jump to Revit. All of a sudden Autodesk is sitting there laughing because we're reading RFPs thinking immediately it's a Revit AutoCAD project when it might be completely the opposite. Might. MicroStation is a BIM application. So the fact is, on this myth, that MicroStation is a 2D CAD platform. So this is Bentley's application that rivals Autodesk's AutoCAD application. So again, debunking myth number 5 leads into this myth. MicroStation is a CAD application. AutoCAD is a CAD application. We have 2 CAD applications. And we have to be cognizant of that because we have agencies, DOTs scattered across the US, several municipalities scattered across Canada. I know there's major agencies in Australia, in Singapore, and Dubai has some agencies that require a MicroStation DGN 2D CAD file. The DGN file format as a deliverable, not DWG from AutoCAD. So keep that in mind when you see that. If there's a CAD deliverable, ask the question to our clients, what do you want? And if the client doesn't know, great, we can recommend, we can help, we can dialogue, all that good stuff. But if the client knows, their response should be one of DWG or DGN. And then we'll know exactly what we have to do to plan our deliverable. The myth, we do MicroStation, therefore we do BIM. Thinking BIM is Revit and MicroStation is BIM, we have something else. So that's a statement riddled in myth. I want to debunk that right away. Autodesk and Bentley are competitors. Autodesk is far more market friendly because they're out there and people know them better and they have a greater market share. Bentley is usually in the larger infrastructure, Department of Transportation type agencies where there's a lot of linear and vertical mixed together, but it is out there, and some of our transit architecture has seen DGN as a deliverable requirement. Neither AutoCAD nor MicroStation are BIM authoring tools, but they may form the platform upon which the applications are built, or they may not. So there's always a CAD aspect, and I'll use Revit as the example. You model in Revit, there's a 2D sheet that's created. It's not AutoCAD, it's not MicroStation, it's Revit. You can export to AutoCAD or MicroStation, but the platform isn't one of the two. Other authoring tools, AutoCAD MEP, AutoCAD's the background. Inroads on MicroStation, in Bentley, MicroStation is the background. So just keep that in mind, but don't get bogged down in MicroStation as this BIM app. The other myth, coupling onto this one, Bentley Systems has no BIM applications. And this has come up when, again, answering RFPs, and a couple of them have said, we want to use Bentley BIM. Well, we can't do that because myth number 1, BIM is Revit, therefore the RFP makes no sense. Or myth number 6, Bentley, oops, that means MicroStation. That's all they got. MicroStation doesn't do anything like Revit. Well, no, because you're not using the right tools. So I'll just jump to and at the bottom there in the fact, Bentley has rivaling BIM authoring tools to that of Autodesk. And I just kind of show a couple of them. We use Revit in IBI, but Bentley has EcoSim. We use Civil 3D in IBI, Bentley has Open Roads, et cetera, et cetera. If you can name anything Autodesk, most likely there's something Bentley. And I just show this slide, it's actually 5 years old now, but that's the gambit of Bentley-based BIM authoring tools. So I'm showing this, just know that they're there. If the takeaway of this session, or one, I'm hoping there's at least a takeaway for each myth, but if one takeaway is, oh yeah, Bentley, Brent muddled off a whole bunch of stuff about it on that myth presentation. Good enough. Contact us. Let's see what the requirement is for the projects. Let's see how to address it as an IBI team. We may be teamed with an external entity that wants to use these building applications, or maybe one that wants to use these road applications. Sure, let's see what they are. Let's see how they come together, and let's see how to build the solution. That's the critical thing. We're about finding the right approach for projects and making sure that we're accommodating the needs of the project, the client, and ourselves. Okay, just doing a time check, we're good. Okay, myth number 8, BIM is too expensive. And this one, some might be reading and seeing this saying, well, Brent, you're nuts. You can't say it costs nothing. But bear with myth 8, 9, and 10. They kind of follow on each other. So when I describe this fact, I'll say applying BIM as a process doesn't actually cost anything because we still have to do what we need to do. And I keep saying there's a difference between simple BIM and doing absolutely everything possible that's asked of us that we don't need to do, that increases our scope, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if I'm just doing BIM to do what I need to do, and I've learned my application, of course it doesn't cost more, right? So this is where I'll use this stuff here to talk through a bit. So the fundamentals of project delivery don't disappear because we're applying BIM. And that triangle, so we were all in those BST courses, scope, schedule, budget, schedule, resources, and scope. I loved how they describe you knock off any one of those vertices, the triangle crumbles. So if I'm doing BIM, what tends to happen is we tend to do more and more and more and more without asking for more schedule or more cost. And that breaks project delivery. What we need to do is to get our people trained on what's required for the fundamentals so that what they need to do anyways becomes more efficient. I've seen, we've done a lot of work trying to normalize our training. So using Revit as an example, but the same would apply for Civil 3D, inroads, Plant 3D, etc. If I'm training someone on how to use Revit, I want to train them on what they have to do and show them the efficiency around it, not train them on everything Revit the application can do, bombard them, overwhelm them, so that the declaration is, it's not going to work because it's too complex. Ask, what are we BIMing and why? And if you can't answer that question, stop and get answers. Engage all the resources we have available to help you get that answer. And the last one I want to touch on, I've heard often, I'm more efficient in 2D. And sometimes I'll actually, and I declare it a myth, but it may be a fact if it's specific to the one user making the statement. But often I'm becomes 2D is more efficient than BIM, or everybody's more efficient in 2D. And the example at the bottom here, there's these two pieces here. So on the bottom left, if this is my design, and now this is, I'm being an architect, I'm using an architectural example here. If I'm modeling this thing, if I have to do it in AutoCAD or in Revit, same breath in MicroStation or in EcoSim, whatever the case is. Here, as you can see in this 2D plan, I've got walls, door, window. If I had to model that with 2D line work and insertion of blocks and all of that, doable. But here in Revit, which is a BIM authoring tool, I model it, I get the fundamental of the 3D view, it's automatically scheduled, all of the components come together, the relationships between the door and the walls, the door and the adjoining wall, etc., it's all there. And then the flip side of that is, it won't let me put a wall right over there against the window. It'll say, no, you can't do that, walls don't finish against the window. So it has these built-in quality checks, and at the end of the day, I can't imagine not doing this using a BIM authoring tool and electing to go and use a 2D application. Very simple, and when I look at this, I'll say, this is what probably the simplest form of BIM you have, but that's where you start. So anybody who's doing 2D for whatever you're doing, whether it's, I'm doing a 2D roadway, I'm doing a piping network, I'm doing structural layout, there's 2D right there, but it's ingrained into a BIM application. The other thing is this pyramid that came from the Canadian Handbook of Practice, Canadian BIM Handbook of Practice. And they've defined those 4 levels. And we've said those in various forms. If you take a specialist or an expert, obviously what I just said makes sense. Why would we go and do something else? But if you take staff who have heard of BIM, listening to all of the dialogue, but has never actually done it in practice, that's where they need the training and the support and the comfort level to know this is the fundamental base pieces of what you need to do when BIMing for your specific purpose. And we confine it with that, build the efficiency, and then the myth is debunked. Well, no, it doesn't cost anything of time and effort for me to, quote, use Revit, if I'm using Revit, or use Civil 3D, or use OpenRoads. But now that I'm doing this and I'm more efficient, now let's do more, potentially. And that leads to the next myth. If we do BIM, our scope drastically increases. Doing BIM does not mean you need or must or have to increase scope. And it's a trap that we've fallen into, and often it goes back to some of the previous myths. So look at the third bullet, we'll jump right there. Since the myth is architect does BIM, coupled with BIM is Revit, therefore the architect has to do everything. That's it, right? Because it's only the architect does it all, and we're not going to pay more because, you know, we've listened to all of the vendors and all of the propaganda about BIM efficiency. So BIM makes the project as a whole efficient. Now let's make the architect do all the work. So let's combat that, because that's a little bit of rubbish there, and we have to deal with that. Again, scope, schedule, budget comes into play. In the world today, though, because BIM is resonating throughout the industry, riddled with myth, and riddled with some lack of capability, and riddled with a whole bunch of experts as well. On our DB and P3 projects, contractors know what BIM, the value of BIM is. And in fact, when you look at this wheel of BIM down at the bottom here, the orange is what we as a design firm would gravitate to. Everything else has a greater benefit for the contractors than it really does for us. So they gravitate, they see the value, but the more they, as the P3 contractors / our client, can get us to do, or sneak into our scope, or get us to agree, the better it is for them. In the same breath, in design bid build, contractors want more, but they're not our boss, right? So they complain up to our collective common client / owner, and we've had instances where the owner overcommits us, whether inadvertently or intentionally, saying, yep, don't worry, the designer, I know they're doing X, or maybe they're doing X, we'll pass that over to you, without actually talking to the design team to understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, so what they're BIMing, why they're BIMing it, and what are the ramifications of increasing the digital turnover to the contractor outside of the requirements that were stated upon the start of the project. So all of it, notice this whole thing has nothing to do with technical, and it's all about communication, setting goals, understanding why things need to be done. If we need to do more, account for it. And accounting for it in the best manner would be, we're doing more, so scope increased, schedule and budget increase accordingly. Very simple, best way, we get paid, we get more work, everybody's happy, we enrich the BIM application, so the application of the BIM process on the project, we enrich the digital turnover, everybody's happy. Often we'll say, let's just do it to make the client happy. Fine, but we have to account for that fact as well. We are choosing to erode our margin to make the client happy. It won't erode it too bad, we'll still make money, we'll have a happier client, and we'll win more work. That's a good story. If we're just doing it to make the client happy, and we erode our margin, and then we get into negative variance, so we start losing money, and the client's kind of not too happy anymore, what was the point? So just account for the fact that if scope is increasing, we know it, and we're either adjusting or we're consciously deciding to enrich what we're doing. And then lastly, we are doing more BIM, but it's depleting our project budget. So as I've just been saying, if additional scope is defined, adjust schedule and budget. And some of the items that I've listed here, often, keeping a happy client, that's one thing, but oftentimes, especially in the P3 type projects, our contractors are driving us to, run weekly meetings, do full clash reports, document them, document resolutions, the communication of the clashes, etc. Some of these items, it's a struggle at times because the contractors will say to us, well, don't you coordinate anyway? And our answer will be yes. And then they'll say, well, then why is this extra scope? Well, we coordinate. Now you're asking us to run processes, document, et cetera, et cetera. So even if it's a minor increase, or if it's an augmentation to what we would normally do in the design process, we should account for it. We have requirements for file turnover, so 2D CAD file translation. So there I'm working in, let's say, OpenRoads and Revit, and I need to deliver in AutoCAD. There's a process. We've got to do something. We need to account for that, or have that built into our initial budget. Creation of advanced visualizations. Often you'll hear, well, you have a model, just make it look pretty and deliver it. And then our Viz teams are, pulling their hair out trying to not eat into a project budget that was never in existence to begin with. Collaboration systems. We're hosting something in the cloud. We're hosting something internally. We're trying to grant access to entities that are not IBI and getting us all to share and making sure data is moving to and from sources and targets. That all takes time. That all takes somebody to manage. As I mentioned there, everything, and that's somebody, this project BIM lead. I have a myth about that afterwards. Sometimes we're increasing efficiency. Sometimes there's something that needs to be paid for. Just wanted to get to that last bullet, so I don't dwell on everything here, but this LOD. So anybody who's worked on proposals or interacted with contractors and you're asked, do a higher LOD, do LOD 400, LOD 500, et cetera, et cetera. That's level of development defined by a North American BIM standard. Now, if you're listening from across the world, there's different standards that are being built in. So different in the UK, United Arab Emirates, they kind of fuse together the UK and North America. At the end of the day, it's how much are you modeling and for what purpose? So I kind of divided their design, construction, operations, and you can see along the bottom, it goes from my beam as a box, a simple rectangular prism, to my beam is something far more complex, showing rebar, et cetera, et cetera. Know what you got to do as a designer, understand what the contractor may want, and have the appropriate dialogue when you feel your scope is being increased. And I'll always say, if you go back to the drawing board or the days of 2D CAD, if you would never do it then, most likely from a professional liability standpoint, we probably still wouldn't do it now, yet we can facilitate the interaction. Everything I just said here happens with a BIM execution plan. Just planning. What are we BIMing? Why are we BIMing it? Why are we asking to do more? How do we say no? That's what this is all about. Identify why, plan, execute, and kind of do a quality assurance support check. There's no support for us to use BIM on our projects. So internal to IBI, design technology has been built to support the application of BIM for IBI. Now, I'm going to preface that because I think I remember on my first or second day, I won't say who on a call said, Brent Mowdy just started, he's quote, our new Revit guy. Nope, I am leading BIM. And there's a big distinct difference, especially after those first 10 myths. So standards, template, content, organization of training, support, mitigation, most critical, helping to define the BIM scope on a project. The BIM scope may be as simple as it's a building and we're using Revit and this is what we're doing, but defining that BIM scope, be very clear. Our mission of design technology is to basically standardize what we do for us to then in turn optimize how we do it, leading into more downstream business models, asset management, et cetera, et cetera. That could be a session all in itself. We have 5 main global portfolios, as I call them, that governs BIM everywhere. Basically, it's stuff like I have to install Revit. Well, installing Revit in North America, UK, India, or anywhere else in the industry, it's going to be consistent. We then have regional leads. So if you're in an office, I have a regional lead for each region. We can go and connect, help to understand your client, interpret RFPs, connect to resources, connect to our network. We have teams that are growing of full-time and part-time BIM coordinators, BIM collaborators, so collaboration systems, making us share our information globally, internally, and externally, Viz experts, etc. We have aligned specialists, local office coordinators. Basically, if there's a BIM question, a BIM concern, an issue, an item to address, there's something to be done about it. So that's what we're here for. Have a look at the news flashes. If anything, send me an email. Hey, Brent, you babbled. You said we had a bunch of people. I need help with X. We'll get you help with X. That's the mission. We can't do BIM because the client either hasn't asked for it or requires, I put AutoCAD or MicroStation, but usually it's, quote, requires CAD. So the fact, the client deliverable can be anything. It quite honestly doesn't matter, okay? Once we know the deliverable, we build a workflow to accommodate. And down the left there, I listed some of the deliverables that I've been faced with over the last decade and a bit. And so the top two are our 2D CAD, probably the most common deliverable still, with AutoCAD DWG files being very common, right? But we've had 3D turnover requirements. So give me the Revit model, the EcoSim, the inroads file, the Civil 3D, etc. Give me ArcGIS turnover, neutral for turnovers. So object files, 3D OBJ files. These review models, I just want to dwell on the third one. That's the symbol for IFC, Industry Foundation Class. IFC is a neutral open BIM format governed by the ISO standards. So most, if not all of the stuff up here can export to that IFC file. So just think about that. A lot of Alberta infrastructure, for example, when they've started to build their BIM standards, they're asking for the open BIM turnover as a minimum requirement. And a lot of agencies around the globe are hitting that as their main turnover need. And then of course there's the PDF turnovers, etc. Down at the bottom, some are asking for data. Hey, give me my PDFs, give me my 2D CAD. I know you're doing BIM, give me your raw models. And by the way, can I have a list of these assets and a list of those assets and a list of this data at starting? And then they start to prescribe formats to deliver them in. Most important, how we work or how we do our work is not governed by our clients. That would be, just imagine us going to the contractor and saying, hey, here's the design. I'm going to tell you how to build it, how to get your materials, what trades to hire, et cetera, et cetera. Our clients most often are asking for a deliverable, most often asking for a really good design where we're innovative and we're applying all of our enhanced branding capabilities and the expertise that we carry globally across IBI. I would love to be privy to a contract that says, you must use AutoCAD, you must use Revit. So then we can expand on those to see, what do you actually mean and what are you asking for? Because most often it's, I have a deliverable. I have a 50-year archive of AutoCAD DWG files. So when you're done the project, please give me DWGs. And we do that. But that has nothing to do with how we develop the information prior to delivering to the client. And that's the critical takeaway of this myth. Okay, just doing a time check. Awesome. Two more. BIM hinders conceptual design. So this is very similar. So the previous myth was about the end output or output at various milestones. This is about the front end. And honestly, conceptual design can be anything, right? As long as we're critical to the fact that there are workflows to get from a concept tool to the BIM authoring tool. So down there, I threw in a couple of concept tools. But what if this is your concept? Sketch on paper. So the message is the BIM process should never, has never, and we have to make sure never does, inhibit or restrict the way you conceive of your design. Whether it is a streetscape, a public space, a building, an interior, it doesn't matter. This is concept design. What we have to be cognizant of, in the same method as I would take this sketch, open up a 2D CAD application, AutoCAD or MicroStation, and start CADing, making my plans, sections, elevations. In the same breath, I would take this sketch and get into a BIM authoring tool. Now, the hard part of the challenge is maintaining that workflow. So you're sketching it, you have this freedom to sketch. And I'm going to stick on the paper here for a second. I go off and I start modeling. You want to update your concept, so sketch it. I'm going to have to update my model. And there has to be an understanding that there is a workflow. And if you tell me to go work and start getting in depth and start getting detailed, and then you go and change the concept, I may rework, I may have tricks. If you go back to that pyramid, if I'm a BIM specialist, I'll adapt. If I'm somebody brand new to BIM and brand new to this authoring tool, I might start to get overwhelmed thinking, oh my God, you changed everything. I now got to start from scratch. And hopefully I reach out to experts to say, hey, how do I address and augment? The other thing, and I'll just pull in these now, we're now in the world of digital concept art, if you will, or digital concept design. So any one of these images you see here could be the source of a concept design. It also could be the source of something that I may continually be upgrading just to quickly identify, change, and augment the idea. I, the conceptual architect, have to be cognizant of the fact that there's a workflow to get to and from full BIM authorship and where I'm working on the concept. I may even have bridging capabilities. Or in the case of this one on the top left, that's Revit. So I may be applying a conceptual change to the same live model that somebody else is working on. And that's a little scary, but conceptually that's possible. Tools like Revit and Vectorworks and AutoCAD and EcoSim that are BIM authoring tools actually have conceptual design tools built inside them as well. So whether it's conceptual modeling and massing tools, or whether it's actually adjusting scripting entries on tools like Dynamo and Generative Components and Grasshopper that directly affect the geometry that then directly affect the modeling as it continues. Just be cognizant of the workflow. I think that's the only takeaway of this. But BIM does not hinder how to conceive our designs. Hopefully, we get to the point where it's actually enhancing. And then the last myth, the CAD BIM lead is a new role. And I've heard that not just here, but I've heard that over the last decade. I don't care what you call it either. Role's been in place for at least 3 decades, if not longer, varying names. One of the other IBIU presentations, CAD manager, CAD lead, interface manager, whatever. On all IBI projects, somebody is the go-to person, right? What design technology is trying to do is find out who are all these go-to people. Let's get them all inside our network so we can just discuss and make sure that there's awareness of workflows and best practices and standards and all that good stuff. Somebody needs to be that point of accountability. If something breaks or we don't know what we're BIMing and why we're BIMing, we don't know who we're sharing our information with, we don't know what the project deliverable is, anything, who do I go to, right? I can go, what I've seen happen is, let's go to the practice director, maybe go to the global sector lead. They might come to myself, and the first question is, okay, great, so who's my person on the project? And it's one big incredible circle right back to the person who asked the question until we find out who the person is that's helping to lead and run that project. So keep that in mind. Doesn't matter what it's called, right? We have information on what it means to be a project BIM lead in the industry that, again, whether the term is BIM coordinator, BIM manager, BIM fill in the blank, whatever, right? When BIM is failing, it's usually because no one is governing its implementation. And I say usually, okay? You could have software and hardware fail, you can have misinterpretation, you can have bad communication between disciplines. There's a lot of things that can happen, but oftentimes it's that governance over the implementation. And an example I can give is somebody tells the modeler, hey, make the building 10 meters wider. And the modeler just does it. And then has to redo the work because what they did to make that deliverable, well, that was the wrong decision. It's nothing about BIM, it's just bad governance over the implementation, the communication workflow, and the data that was feeding the decision. So that kind of looks at the bottom right there. So this BIM coordinator, one of the roles they do is kind of help to bring stuff together. And whether they're formally doing clashes and managing the models and identifying the info, or whether they're just trying to help to mitigate all of that communication in between engineers, managers, architects, clients, and whomever else. Help to fix those issues with the modeler. Sometimes the modeler and the managers are the same people. Sometimes the architect and the BIM coordinator are the same, whatever. The point is that there's somebody who's accountable, that go-to person that's helping to mitigate, helping to make sure that people are aware, and just helping to bring all that data together. So come the completion of a project, we actually have something that's fit for purpose, usable downstream, and actually worthwhile. So summary of the facts there, I'm not going to go over them all, but at the top there, something at a presentation in China. If you think BIM is just a tool, it'll just be a 3D model, if that. If you think it's a method, you can start to raise your efficiency. But if you think of it as a concept and a process, you can really do anything with it. And that's the power of BIM, but you need to control it based on these myths. Don't let the myths drive either your understanding or interpretation of BIM. Stick with the facts. And if you see the myths being used out there, call them on it. Ask the questions, or just get the clarification that what we're saying is what we mean to be said. If you listen to this and said, okay, great, that's a nice little bit of information, no more, no more. You say, Brent, I'd love a lot more, a little more. Last year, we built the IBIU BIM course, so it is available online. I'm open to repeating this session, plus any 1 or 14 of the sessions listed on here. All of these listed, so everyone will get an AIA certificate for listening today. All of these ones listed on this slide are AIA certified as well. If you saw the announcement in the last month or so, if you complete 10 of the 14 sessions, you can qualify for individual CAN-BIM Level 1 certification. So you just take your AIA certificates, fill out the CAN-BIM application, and you'll be granted Level 1. So a lot of information. Some of the images that were in today's myth presentation were pulled out of some of the slides that are scattered across these 14 sessions. Lastly, help us fight BIM mytholitis, because it will spread unless we combat these symptoms. And you'll see it. Like if you remember BIM is not Revit. Listen to how many times you hear the interchangeable nature of those two words in the dialogue that we have. Listen to your P3 contractors. Listen to how they try to slip more things at you when you're in dialogue or trying to define scope. Listen to how many times the assumption of CAD equals AutoCAD resonates in either defining what we're doing or how we're doing it. Just listen for it, and then help. Send them to me, send them to the design technology team, help spread the word, and we can definitely move onward. And with that, I just want to thank everybody. I see we have 5 minutes left. I'll have a look at some of the questions and comments on here. So we got here, BIM costs a lot when a project manager hires new people and lets them put them into a Revit project without filtering the users for their skills and experience. Yes, and that's a very good point, right? So when we're increasing our teams, oftentimes I'll hear, I need to make Revit hires. And I hear that, and on the surface, it's good, right? We want to increase our people, but you've got people, you may be hiring people that have just learned the software but not how to apply it, or they know how to use Revit but not how to put buildings together, not how to work in multidisciplinary teams. Be cognizant of that. And I like saying, think of a buddy system where you have somebody quality check their work, have them connect with somebody to help them grow into how we work and why we work, because it's very dangerous just to throw them on projects. Somebody wants to add another myth. BIM automatically makes visualizations. No, absolutely. And if that was a suggestion I may have said, definitely not. But yeah, that definitely is a myth out there, that because you have a model, and that was the comment on the BIM scope. You have a model, So boom, press a couple buttons and now you have visualization. Now you have your renderings, your BIM 360s, your animations. It's completely not the case. And it is a myth out there. And that's a Viz specific myth, but it'll be the same thing. Just because you have BIM, now I have a full cost estimation. Just because you have BIM, I have everything I need for my asset management system. So again, that scope increase. If you haven't defined what you're BIMing and why you're BIMing it, you're going to reach the end of the project and a client might take your model and say, hey, architect, where's all of my light switches because I want to put them in an asset management system? And well, they're not there because as architects, we wouldn't probably never model that to begin with. So that's a good point. When converting the design to a different format, type, and platform, does the design get affected? If yes, how do you limit the decrease in quality, avoid missing information? How do you ensure that there's no information missing? So there's always a concern when you're going from software to software. So one of the means, so using Civil 3D and Open Roads, going between civil BIM authoring tools is still a challenge today, right? When you go from one to the other, most likely you will lose information, or you'll most likely lose metadata, which is information about the components. You'll probably get geometry, but you may not get it all. In the building BIM world, going from Revit to EcoSim to AutoCAD has gotten a lot better in the last decade because of the IFC file format. So the idea there is it brings to a generic nature the data and the geometry so that it can then be plugged into any application. But you definitely do get data loss. I think the trick, and again, it's the upfront role of the project BIM lead. What are you BIMing? Why are you BIMing it? What are you sharing? How are you sharing it? And what do you have to deliver? All those are the fundamental questions. And knowing what you have to deliver, coupled with what are you BIMing and why are you BIMing it, the deliverable may force us into a different mode of modeling if the deliverable has to be robust or of high quality from an information perspective, if you will. But if the deliverable is a PDF, no concerns, right? We just have to make sure that our internal workflows are allowing us to share information across platforms where we have to. If the deliverable is a data-rich model coupled with information lists and output, we're going to have to definitely analyze how and why we model to make sure that that deliverable can be achieved. But I guess, one of the things, and you'll notice if you go around IBI, if we're using Revit, which, for the vast majority of building sector projects, that's the choice of application, we're trying to do a lot more we're trying to do as much in Revit as possible, so you're within the one application. And there you may hear or see us delving into trying to do stuff outside the building as well, buried outside, just to get more and more content in the one application so that we don't have to worry about converting while designing. But there's always that, you just have to test the workflow, I think, is the main message out. That's all, I think that's all the questions I have on here. So if there's, just give another minute or so if there's any other questions. If not, I just want to thank everybody for your attendance. We had a pretty awesome turnout on this one, so I'm ecstatic about that. And yeah, any questions or comments, please send them my way. Design Technology, we're here for you. I am recording this, so I'll put the recording, I'll make the recording available as well, and the presentations are already out there on the SharePoint site. Okay, thank you everybody, and have a great day.